Welcome to the All Sorts podcast, where the vibrant threads of curiosity are woven into a rich tapestry of understanding.
Glad to be diving in.
Today, we're diving deep into a powerful and, well, often overlooked aspect of education.
Its role as a dynamic force for social and political change.
Exactly. Think of knowledge itself as like a seed.
Mm-hmm.
And the act of teaching as the cultivation that can, blossom into movements and transform societies.
Our deep dive today focuses right on that. Education as social and political activism. We'll be drawing on accounts of student movements.
Yeah, the ones that shaped nations.
Right. And exploring the quiet, sometimes, but crucial advocacy of teachers through history.
And those moments where schools, actual institutions, became centers of resistance.
Bastions against injustice, really.
So our mission today is to really get how education hasn't just been about, personal growth.
Important, but not the whole story.
But a key driver in challenging the status quo and sparking real societal transformation. Okay, let's get started. How about we look at that often electrifying energy of student activism first?
Yeah, let's do that. It's fascinating, actually.
Yeah.
Student collective action at university level. It goes back almost to the birth of universities themselves.
Really? That far back?
Oh, yeah. We're talking 13th century. Paris, Bologna. Students were already organizing.
What were they organizing about back then?
Mostly what they called town and gown issues.
Town and gown. Catchy.
It is, isn't it? Basically disputes between the students and the local townspeople. Or the university authorities.
Like what? Like rent prices?
Pricing in shops, yeah. Or legal stuff, like who had jurisdiction if a student got into trouble. Things like that.
Okay, so local campus issues.
Right.
It didn't stop there, did it?
Not at all. And this is where it gets, I think, really compelling. This tradition of students tackling much bigger political issues. It has a really long history.
How long?
Centuries. Take Joseon Dynasty Korea, 1519. Yeah, 150 students from Sungkyunkwan University demonstrated against the king himself.
Against the king? What about?
It was about something called the Kimyo Purge, a major political shakeup, removing officials. Imagine taking that kind of stand back then.
That's incredibly bold. Sets a precedent, you could say.
It really does. And that spirit, students getting involved in wider politics, it just continued and evolved all over the world.
So student groups became pretty central.
Often, yeah. Central roles in movements pushing for democracy, fighting for civil rights globally.
And it's not just one type of student, is it?
Absolutely not. That's what's striking today. Modern student movements. They're incredibly diverse. All ages, races, socioeconomic backgrounds.
Different political views, too, I bet.
Definitely. A whole spectrum of political perspectives involved.
So what kinds of things do they focus on now?
Oh, it's a huge range. It could be really specific internal stuff at their university, like demanding divestment from fossil fuels, say.
Right, campus issues.
Or it could be massive global challenges. War, human rights, fighting oppressive regimes. It really runs the gamut.
Okay, let's make this concrete. Can we look at some examples? Country by country, maybe?
Yeah, good idea. Let's illustrate the global impact. Argentina, for instance, 1918.
Yep.
University Revolution, there was a massive moment.
University Revolution, what did they want?
Students were pushing hard for the democratization of higher education, making it more accessible, reforming governance.
And did it work?
It led to significant reforms, yeah. And it wasn't just Argentina. It had this ripple effect across Latin America, inspiring similar movements, kind of a domino effect.
Interesting. Okay, where else?
How about Poland? Leading up to the Solidarity movement, late 70s, students were heavily involved.
Solidarity, right. Big deal.
Huge. And what's really interesting there is the underground education set up in 78.
Underground education.
Yeah, the Association for Academic Courses, they offered secret teaching in subjects the communist government was trying to suppress.
Wow. So direct intellectual resistance.
Exactly. Plus, there were big student protests back in 1968 demanding more political freedom.
That Polish example really shows how just teaching, just education itself can be resistance against oppression, doesn't it?
It perfectly illustrates it. Then look at China. Student activism, a recurring, powerful force throughout its modern history.
Like the May 4th movement.
Precisely. 1919. A pivotal moment for modernization, democracy. Largely kicked off by student protests.
And then much later, Tiananmen Square in 89.
Yes, tragically. Students bravely advocating for political reform left a huge, lasting impact, of course.
A legacy that still resonates today. Okay, moving over to Europe.
France. France has a very rich history of student activists really shaping public debate. The May 1968 uprisings are probably the most famous example.
Right. May's 68 started with students, didn't it?
It did, began with university issues, but quickly escalated, challenged broader societal norms, political structures.
And it went global, right? Influenced movements everywhere.
Absolutely. It shows how sometimes these seemingly local complaints can ignite something much, much bigger, a real catalyst.
It's fascinating how that happens. What about somewhere like Hong Kong?
Hong Kong's another great example. Student-led protests there have been prominent. Think 2012, the protests against moral and national education.
That was the curriculum change, wasn't it? More nationalistic.
Exactly. Students pushed back hard. And then the 2014 umbrella movement, advocating for more electoral democracy.
So students were really on the front lines defending their values.
Very much so. Defending their vision for the future.
The range of issues is just incredible. India,
too. The Assam movement, 1979 to 85. Massive student-led protests against illegal immigration. Huge concerns about regional identity, resources.
and more recently.
The 2017 Jallikattu protests. Again, significant student participation. That was focused more on cultural preservation, animal rights. Shows the diversity of concerns.
Definitely. Indonesia, you mentioned change there.
Yeah, Indonesia is key. Student resistance has been absolutely critical at major turning points. In the 1960s, and again in 1998 with the fall of Suharto.
So students were often the first to speak out.
Often among the first to voice that widespread discontent, and to mobilize public opinion. They acted as real agents of political transition.
Powerful. And South Africa, of course, the anti-apartheid movement.
You can't talk about student activism without mentioning South Africa. The student contributions were immense, and tragically, the 1976 Soweto uprising.
A terrible reminder.
A stark, terrible reminder of the courage and the sacrifice of young people fighting systemic injustice.
Shifting to more recent times, Greta Thunberg.
Right. Greta Thunberg in Sweden really galvanized an international student climate movement, showed how one student's action can spark global collective action.
Putting pressure on world leaders.
Exactly. And the U.S., you've got the largest student strike in American history, May, June 1970, after the Kent State shootings.
A massive response.
Huge. And then the disinvestment from South Africa movement in the 80s. Students pushing universities to divest, influencing international policy.
It's just undeniable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Student activism is this dynamic, constantly evolving force, responding to everything from campus life to global crises.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so let's shift focus a bit. Let's talk about teachers, another vital group in education.
Absolutely.
There's sometimes this idea, maybe particularly around the civil rights movement, that teachers weren't heavily involved, but that doesn't quite ring true, does it?
No, it doesn't ring true at all. And it really highlights why we need a broader understanding of what participation in a movement actually looks like.
Meaning it's not always marching.
Exactly. It's true, many teachers, especially black teachers in the Jim Crow South, couldn't risk public, direct action like marches or sit-ins.
The risks were too high, losing their jobs, worse.
Very real fears, losing jobs, facing severe repercussions. But that doesn't mean they weren't deeply, crucially involved in other ways, essential ways.
Right. So, looking beyond the most visible protests, what kind of support were teachers providing? Behind-the-scenes stuff.
Well, accounts from that time show teachers often formed the backbone of the support networks.
The backbone? How so?
They prepared meals for civil rights workers. They offered vital transportation for leaders traveling between towns to organize. Their classrooms sometimes became meeting places after hours.
Wow. That's the kind of logistical work that often gets overlooked, isn't it?
Completely overlooked, but absolutely indispensable. Made the movement function. And crucially, for safety reasons, a lot of this wasn't written down.
Makes sense. Too risky.
Which is why oral histories from that period are just incredibly valuable. They fill in those gaps.
Okay. And what about inside the classroom? Especially when schools started integrating. That must have been intense.
The role of black teachers in those newly integrated classrooms, it was profoundly impactful, but also incredibly demanding.
How so? What were they facing?
Often intense racial prejudice from white students, parents, even some administrators.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It was. Yet just by being there, by their professionalism, they acted as powerful counterexamples to the negative stereotypes their white students had probably heard their whole lives.
So their presence itself was a challenge to prejudice.
A huge challenge. Imagine a white kid taught certain harmful things about black people, suddenly having a knowledgeable, caring, effective black teacher, day after day.
That could really shift perspectives.
Those daily interactions could be deeply transformative, chip away at those ingrained biases.
But it sounds like integration put a huge, maybe unfair burden on Black teachers specifically?
Tragically, yes. Research often reveals this deep sense of regret among Black educators.
Regret about what?
About how integration was often implemented.
Yeah.
It frequently led to Black teachers, even highly skilled ones, being demoted or just dismissed when they moved to white schools or when Black schools were just shut down.
Seriously, demoted or dismissed?
Yes. There are documented cases of less qualified white teachers even being put into historically Black schools. And beyond that, integration often meant dismantling vital Black educational institutions.
Like what kind of institutions?
Even Black teachers' associations. These were crucial support networks, platforms for advocacy within their own communities. They were often dissolved.
So loss of community and power, too.
Many Black educators felt the long-term consequences weren't considered. A huge amount of talent and experience was just lost.
It's a sobering point. That change, even with good intentions, can have really complex negative side effects.
Definitely something to keep in mind.
Okay, fast forward to today. We're seeing a kind of resurgence in teacher activism now, aren't we?
We definitely are. It's really interesting.
What's driving it? Is it still pay and conditions or something else?
Well, those traditional concerns, fair pay, better working conditions, they're still major factors, absolutely.
But there's more to it.
Yeah. We're increasingly seeing activism driven by a broader commitment to their students' well-being, to the health of their communities.
Okay, tell me more about that.
It connects to this idea of bargaining for the common good.
Bargaining for the common good. What does that mean in practice?
It means teacher unions are negotiating for things that benefit more than just their members. They're tackling broader social issues that impact students and families.
Like housing or support services.
Exactly. Things like that.
So for young teachers starting out today, maybe wanting to be advocates, what advice would you give them?
That's a great question. I'd say a few key things. First, self-reflection is crucial.
Knowing yourself.
Yeah. Understand your own motivations, especially if your background is different from your students. Actively work on understanding your own biases, your assumptions.
Okay, that's number one. What else?
Second, dive into the history. Research the history of teacher activism. Realize you're part of a long line of educators fighting for change.
Learn from the past.
Learn from their strategies, their successes, their setbacks, what worked, what didn't, what challenges did they face.
Good point.
And third, finally remember, advocacy is rarely a solo act. Impactful change usually comes from working together.
So solidarity.
Absolutely. Build solidarity. Work collectively with other teachers, with parents, with community members who share your concerns. There's strength in numbers.
That's really solid advice. Self-awareness, history, and collective action. Okay, let's explore another angle. This idea that education itself can be an act of resistance.
Yes. This really gets to the core, I think.
It's not just about protests or lobbying. The actual act of learning, of teaching, that can be defiance.
Perfectly shown by the freedom schools during the civil rights movement.
The freedom schools, tell us about those.
Well, think about the context. Deeply entrenched white resistance to giving Black Americans equal education.
Right. Segregation, underfunding.
Exactly. So in that context, just offering any kind of empowering education was profoundly defiant.
Just setting them up was resistance.
But they went further. The freedom schools offered a really personalized experience. It centered the lived experiences, the emotional realities of Black students.
How did they do that?
The curriculum actively encouraged students to reflect. How did these topics make them feel? Why were they significant in their lives? It wasn't just abstract learning.
And the curriculum itself, it tackled racism head on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Directly addressed the history, the ongoing reality of institutionalized racial persecution, explored the legacies of slavery.
Learning practical skills, too.
Crucially, yes. It equipped students with knowledge about methods of activism, how to resist effectively.
It's remarkable and depressingly relevant today, isn't it, given the fights over curriculum?
It's both remarkable and deeply concerning how relevant it remains. And yes, the political opposition it faces now is significant.
Like Florida banning the AP African American Studies course.
That's a prime example. Or the promotion of things like the 1776 Project, which pushes a more, well, nationalistic, arguably sanitized version of American history.
It feels like there's a real fear around teaching accurate history, especially about race and inequality.
There seems to be. And obstructing the teaching of history as it actually happened. Well, It hinders our ability to understand the present, doesn't it?
You can't understand now without understanding then.
And it can end up reinforcing harmful myths, inaccurate narratives. The Freedom School curriculum aimed to empower students to analyze and challenge injustice.
Whereas some other initiatives
Initiatives that prioritize instilling, say, an uncritical love of country over historical truth risk perpetuating the very problems they claim to oppose.
It's a really stark contrast in philosophies of education.
Wow. Now, there's another incredible story of resistance within an institution, the Reformed Teacher Training College in Amsterdam, during the Nazi occupation.
Ah, yes. An absolutely incredible story of courage.
Tell us about it. This really shows a school as a hub of resistance.
It does. Johann von Holst became the principal in 1943. He was devoutly anti-Nazi.
The government cut funding because he wouldn't cooperate with Nazi policies, but he was determined to keep the school open.
Just keeping it open was an act of defiance.
It was. And he did more. He allowed university students to register at the college, sort of unofficially, to help them avoid being drafted for forced labor in Germany.
How did he manage that?
Cleverly backdated their registration papers, gave them a plausible reason to be there, not available for labor. Real ingenuity under pressure.
Incredible. And then there is the connection to the daycare next door.
Yes, this is where it gets even more intense. The director of the daycare, Henriette Pimentel, was desperately trying to save Jewish children.
Children being separated from their parents.
Yes, at a nearby assembly point before deportation, Pimentel worked secretly with Van Holst.
How did they work together?
Initially, they just arranged for the kids to play in the college garden. There was only a small hedge between the properties.
Seemed innocent enough.
Exactly. Then, gradually, the children started taking naps in the college classrooms.
Ah, creating opportunities.
Crucial opportunities. For the children to be secretly moved out, transferred to safe houses by the resistance.
So the teacher training college became part of this underground railroad, effectively.
In a very real sense, yes. They developed escape routes. The college janitor helped watch the entrance, signal when it was safe for resistance members to come collect children.
Van Holst must have been terrified of being discovered.
He went to extraordinary lengths to keep it secret, not just from the Nazis, but from most of his own students, even some staff, to protect everyone.
But the daycare itself, it didn't end well.
Tragically, no. The daycare was eventually raided. Henriette Pimentel was arrested, deported, and ultimately murdered in a concentration camp.
Heartbreaking. It shows the immense risks they are all taking.
Absolutely. But even after that blow, Van Holst didn't stop resisting.
What else did he do?
In 1944, the Germans demanded the names of his students, likely for forced labor. He flat out refused, directly defied them, saved those students.
Incredible bravery. Was the operation ever discovered?
Almost. There's a remarkable twist. A state inspector showed up unexpectedly, stumbled upon the hidden children in the college.
Oh no, that must have been terrifying.
Could have been disastrous.
Yeah.
But in an amazing stroke of luck, the inspector, Gesine van der Molen, she was already part of the Dutch resistance.
You're kidding.
No. So instead of exposing them, she discovered what they were doing and actually joined the effort, helping rescue even more children.
That is an unbelievable story. Just extraordinary courage and resilience right there inside a school. It really drives home how education can be tied to the fight for basic human rights.
It absolutely does.
Okay, one more area to touch on, teacher strikes. Another form of advocacy.
Yes, a significant one.
We often think of strikes as being about wages, working conditions, right?
And historically, that was definitely the main focus. A strike, that organized refusal to work, is usually the last resort when contract talks break down.
But that's changing.
We've seen a real evolution recently. Strikes increasingly include these broader social justice demands, that bargaining for the common good idea again.
Can you give some examples? Where have we seen these broader demands in recent strikes?
Sure. Chicago, 2012 and 2019. Key demands included more funding for school nurses, social workers, even affordable housing initiatives for students and families.
Wow, so really looking beyond the classroom walls.
Definitely. Los Angeles, 2019, they fought for and won more community schools, legal support for students dealing with immigration issues.
That's huge. Any others?
Oakland, just this year. Teachers struck and got commitments for a reparations task force, focusing resources on schools with high percentages of Black students.
So teachers are using their collective power for wider community well-being. That's a big shift.
It really is, leveraging their power in a comprehensive way.
What about the legality, though? Aren't teacher strikes illegal in many places?
They are. In the U.S., 37 states and D.C. actually prohibit teacher strikes by law.
So what happens if they strike anyway?
Penalties can range. Fines, getting fired, even losing your teaching license. Sometimes brief jail time, though that's rare.
But they still happen.
They do. Legal bans don't always stop strikes, especially if teachers feel united and think they have public support.
Have strikes become more or less common?
Interestingly, they were actually more common back in the mid to late 20th century. That was around when many public sector bargaining laws passed.
And now?
Strike activity dipped for a while, but there are signs it might be ticking up again. Economic pressures, maybe a growing willingness among teachers to use that collective power for broader issues.
It seems like teachers are increasingly seeing their power to make change, not just for themselves, but for students and communities.
I think that's right.
And striking isn't the only option, is it? There are other labor actions.
Correct. Beyond a full strike, teachers use other tactics.
What?
Walk-ins, for example.
Walk-ins.
Teachers and supporters gather outside school before the day starts, raise awareness about issues. Then there's work to rule.
Where they do the bare minimum.
Exactly. Strictly follow the contract, no voluntary or unpaid duties. And sick-outs.
Toward coordinated absences.
Right. Calling in sick together to disrupt operations. So they have a range of tools.
Okay. It's clear teachers have various ways to advocate when they feel it's necessary. So let's try and pull all these threads together. Education and social political activism. What are the big takeaways?
Well, synthesizing all this, it's just undeniable that education isn't some neutral space. It's a dynamic arena.
Where people act?
Where individual students and teachers and the institutions themselves have played and still play absolutely vital roles. Challenging injustice, driving change.
From student passion to teacher dedication.
To courageous acts of resistance within schools.
Right.
The pursuit, the provision of knowledge. It can be an incredibly powerful force for shaping a more just, more equitable world.
So, as we reflect on these powerful journeys through history, we see that education is so much more than just textbooks and classrooms.
So much more.
It is a living, breathing force, capable of igniting movements, challenging oppression, and ultimately shaping a more just world for all.
Well said.
From the bold and inspiring actions of student activists to the quiet yet unwavering courage of teachers and the unexpected sanctuary offered by educational institutions in times of profound crisis.
Yeah.
The pursuit and provision of knowledge is, in its essence, a profound act of social and political engagement.
If this deep dive into the transformative power of education has ignited your curiosity and expanded your understanding, then you'll find a wealth of similar explorations waiting for you within the archives of the All Sorts podcast.
We really invite you to journey with us through our past discussions. Each one's a unique adventure into fascinating ideas and perspectives.
And to make sure you never miss a future expedition into the realms of knowledge and understanding, please take just a moment to illuminate that subscribe button on our All Sorts Podcast YouTube channel.
Yeah, hit subscribe, share this exploration with fellow seekers of knowledge, and let's keep building this vibrant community where curiosity doesn't just bloom, it flourishes.
And continue the vital conversation beyond this deep dive. Follow the All Sorts Podcast on X, Instagram, and Threads.
You'll get more insights, maybe some behind-the-scenes stuff from our research, and great opportunities to connect with a community that really believes in the power of being well-informed and engaged.
Finally, consider this. In what meaningful ways can you, within your own sphere of influence, begin to see education not merely as a pathway for personal advancement, but as a potent and readily available tool for fostering positive change in the world that surrounds you?